senior feed and their list of ingredients. This one as well, this one starts out with soybean hulls. But what I like about this too is they're showing, oh, just in case you're wondering, propionic acid they're using as a preservative. So very informative, but not all feed has to do that, nor do they do that. So here, the next is an example. This is straight from the AFCO manual. Grain products, plant protein products, processed grain byproducts, molasses products, roughage products. So these are all what we consider collective terms, and it is legal for feed companies to use collective terms. AFCO actually has it listed out what ingredients fall under that collective term. But as a consumer, you wouldn't know what exactly they're putting in there, other than it's a grain product. So why would a feed company do this? In a lot of cases, it really is based on the product, whether we're talking a premium product versus an economy product. This may be a result of fixed ingredient formulation. So what that means, a feed company, so we've designed the feed, we know we want to have the nutrients, and we've got our guaranteed analysis. Well, now we've also designed the feed based on the ingredients, and we know it takes, 10 pounds of X to give us whatever nutrient level we want in this final feed. Well, for a fixed ingredient formulation, when they make it, they're saying we're going to keep that nutrient level where it is by always using these ingredients at these levels. Another way that feed can be made is, all right, we've decided on the nutrients. Now, this month, ingredient Y might be cheaper than ingredient B. But if I use ingredient Y and C together, I can get the same level of whatever nutrient we're looking at, so say protein, as I do with ingredient B. So the ingredients themselves may change, but the nutrients, the nutrient level stays the same. Another reason why, besides those reasons, feed company might decide to use collective terms might be consumer demand. They don't want to see collective terms. People like knowing exactly what's in there. And as far as what is accepted, yes, AFCO has their rules, but then there are state by state laws from there. And so every time a feed manufacturer makes a feed, they then have to go and register that feed in every one of the states they're selling it in. And it has to get approved by their state feed control official. So the last piece of the rules that I said we were going to really focus on, and I've greened out all of these brands, so we're just talking about different examples, is the feeding directions. And what I want to point out is that there's no one way to do feeding directions on a bag of feed. As long as the directions are there, it's acceptable. So in the top example, we have it written in paragraph form. If your horse can eat hay, here are the directions. If your horse cannot eat hay, here are the directions. On this bottom example, it's in a chart, a table form, broken out by weight class of the horse. The top, where it's in this table, is if the horse cannot eat hay, but written below, there's directions for if the horse can eat hay. For this example over here, we have a chart with no forage and broken down by class of horse, so whether they're in maintenance and light work, so on and so forth. And then the bottom chart is if they can consume forage. So let's go through some examples. So these are all examples of commercially available senior feeds. So if your horse can eat hay, begin with 6 pounds per day. If your horse cannot eat hay, 12 pounds of this senior product per day. If we go down to this one, if we look at an average 1,000-pound horse, maintenance, 14 pounds of this product per day. However, if the horse is consuming hay, specifically for every 1.5 to 2 pounds, the directions, right, reduce this 14 by 1 pound. Over here, we've got the no forage. And again, if we're using that 1,000-pound example, 13.5 pounds. But if we're making the assumption that the horse is consuming 10 pounds of hay or pasture, we can drop it down to 7 pounds. Does that seem like a lot to anyone? Keep that in mind, that these are the directions that the manufacturer, that a PhD nutritionist formulated this to be, available for your horse, is suggesting your horse consume. And, I love asking the question, how many people are actually feeding that much? So we've been talking, using senior feeds as an example. Here are some feeding directions for ration balancers. So ration balancers are designed if your horses need minimum calories outside of what they're consuming from hay and pasture, but they need to balance out their protein and vitamin and mineral requirements. So the ration balancer is exactly that. It's balancing out those nutrients beyond what hay or pasture alone can do. So for this one, if we look for weight maintenance, the horse, that 1,000-pound horse, that's the example we've been using, 1 pound of this product per day. If we go down to this one, for balancing pasture hay, 1 to 1.5 pounds for that 1,000-pound horse. Over to this product, idle mature horse, 1 to 2 pounds. So that's substantially different in our feeding directions. But it's amazing how many barns I go to, and they're like, oh, well, we've got the senior feed and we're just feeding it to everybody. Well, what's wrong with just feeding everybody the senior feed? We're going to come back to that. So now we've talked about the rules. We've given some examples of each section of those rules that are really the most important part for you to be paying attention to when you're looking at your bag of feed. Now let's put the whole package together. So as anyone who joined in earlier and saw my daughter in here, we're all living a special time these days. And, I was joking with one of my friends who's having to do math with her daughter. And she says, I don't remember how to do this stuff. And everybody gets scared of math. But when we're talking about the guaranteed analysis and then what that means for what your horse is actually eating, we have to do some math. And I promise it's not hard. It's easy math. Ooh, I don't know if everybody's muted. So the first thing here, we've got this example, and this is that one of those senior feeds we had looked at earlier. So it has that there's 14%, that's the minimum, crude protein. Okay, well, that's a percentage. So how much is the horse actually getting? Well, it depends on how much they're eating of the product. So if we follow the no forage rules, just for ease of the example, 14 pounds, 14%, so that's 14 divided by 100, so 0.14 times 14 pounds, because that's how much we're feeding. So the horse is actually consuming 1.96 pounds of crude protein. For the fat, if we look at that, that's 5%. So again, 5 divided by 100 times 14 is 0.7. For our fiber, if we're just using crude fiber, 18.5. We get 2.59 pounds of crude fiber being consumed per day. Now, what's very important to look at, especially for horses that maybe have some metabolic issues, is that starch and sugar. So here it's listed out individually, starch and sugar. Sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, it might be written as NSC, or non-structural carbohydrate. So to get our non-structural carbohydrate or our starch, sugar, we're adding them together. So in this case, we've got 11 plus 7, that's 18%. So again, now divide that 18 by 100, multiply by how much we're giving them, and that's 2.52 pounds of starch and sugar per day. So for a horse that is metabolic, that might be something that's concerning you. And again, this is where I would suggest talking to a nutritionist or your veterinarian. So this was just the feed. We didn't take into account if there was forage involved. And that's where it's always great to test your hay. And we mentioned a little bit about if you do that, what your results might look like. So another example here, and this one, again, same thing, except for this has the same amount of protein in it as the previous example, except this one said we're feeding 12 pounds. So because we're feeding 12 pounds of the same amount of protein, this horse is consuming less protein with this feed. But in this feed's example, it has 10% crude fat, and we're feeding at a lower rate. So this horse would be getting 1.2 pounds per day of crude fat, whereas the previous bag, it would only be getting 0.7 pounds. So this is where I really want to point out that math and paying attention to those feeding directions is very important. Again, we touched on earlier some of the other fun things that they can add to the guaranteed analysis, like omega-3 fatty acids, or here we've got vitamin C. Vitamin E is one that was being added a lot because of the interest in how vitamin E is necessary, and people are paying attention to that now. Also, we have a lot of different fermentation products in here. So these are things that can be added, and there are rules to how you add them to the guaranteed analysis, but they can be added in there. And again, we discussed why a company might choose to do that. So the last example of putting it all together is one of those ration balancers. And in this case, we have double the amount of protein, but we're feeding 1 pound. So it's getting 0.28 pounds of crude protein per day. The fat is much lower because, again, it's even though it's being fed 4%, it's 1 pound. So it's getting very little fat, because remember, this product isn't meant to deliver a lot of calories. It's meant to deliver minimal calories while being able to provide the protein and vitamins and minerals. And again, in this case, it was written out as starch and sugar. So our non-structural carbohydrate together, we have 0.14. Okay, so you're all going, all right, well, that was great. I've glazed over. We get it. We're supposed to do math. But why does it matter? Well, remember I talked about that, you know, I've gone into barns and everybody's getting, some horse might be getting a handful and some may be getting, 6 pounds of the same feed. Well, let's say that they're